Welcome back to another podcast in our Sacramental Prep series. These programs are a production of the Faith Formation team at St. Julie Billiart Catholic Church in San Jose, California. In this series, we'll be exploring the question, are we spiritual beings? Welcome back to this fourth program in our series of podcasts about who or what we are as human beings. Now, in our first three programs, we learned that people sometimes behave in ways that seem to contradict the idea that we are fundamentally just animals. And although most human behavior is inspired by our animal instincts, there is a behavior that the Greeks called agape, which has never been observed in the animal kingdom except in humans. And so if agape is not inspired by any of the animal instincts, where does it come from? Well, to answer that question, we're going to spend today's podcast exploring reality. Have you tried out one of the virtual reality headsets? You put this thing on your head, and you can play games in 3D. Not only that, when you turn your head, your field of vision turns with it. So it's a lot more realistic than ordinary games. And at the end, something horrible happens to you, and the game's over. But suppose that you wanted to build a virtual reality system that could really fool people into thinking that what they were experiencing was real. What would you have to do? Today's virtual reality headsets allow you to see and hear all the things that make up the game. But so far, at least, nobody has built a virtual reality headset that allows you to smell the things in the game, nor can you taste them or touch them. So if you wanted to build a virtual reality system that was so real that people literally couldn't tell the difference, well, the first thing you'd have to do would be to have it emulate all five senses, not just one or two of them. And even if you built such a thing, would it be enough to fool people? Actually, no, it wouldn't. Because there's a lot more to reality than the things that you can detect with your five senses. To show you what I mean, let's think about an iceberg for a moment. An iceberg looks like a very small floating island, but you can only see a small part of it. If you could look under the water, you'd see that 90% of the iceberg is below the waterline, where you can't see it. Similarly, the thing that most people call reality is very much like an iceberg, because first of all, like an iceberg, reality has two parts. There is a part that's above the waterline, meaning that you can detect it with your five senses or emulate it with a virtual reality headset. It consists of all of the physical things that make up the world that we live in, as well as all of the things that make up the other planets and galaxies in our universe. This part is called physical reality. But there is a lot more to reality than just the physical part. 90% of reality is below the waterline, where you can't see it, hear it, touch it, feel it, or smell it. Now, this has led some people to ask a question.
You're telling me I can't see it, I can't hear it, nor feel it, nor touch it, nor smell it. So how in the dickens am I supposed to know it's really there?
It's a good question. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is a picture that was taken of me and my wife at our wedding. Now, I love my wife. Her name is Monica, and she means more to me than anything or anybody in the world. We were married over 40 years ago, and everything that I do in my life, I do because of my love for her. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that my love for Monica is real. And yet, it's not part of physical reality. You can't weigh love or measure it. You can't see it, hear it, touch it, taste it, or smell it. And yet I know that it's really there because I experience it every day. Even though it's not part of physical reality, it's part of something else. And yet, this is only the first of a number of things which reside in this hidden part of reality. Let me give you another example. Have you ever hated anybody? Or perhaps you've known somebody who seems to be consumed with hatred for a particular person or a particular group of people? Well, like love, hatred is not a thing. None of your five senses can detect it. It cannot be measured or weighed, and so it just doesn't belong in physical reality. Now, in spite of the fact that love and hate are two very powerful emotions, not everything that resides in this lower part of reality is emotional. For example, have you ever known somebody who is selfless, who constantly seems to be doing things for other people? Or perhaps you've met somebody who's exactly the opposite. Someone who's just indifferent to other people's problems, no matter how serious they might be. Selflessness and indifference are both characteristics that simply don't exist in physical reality. But people who experience them know that they are very real. And in the same way, empathy, greed, ambition, laziness, happiness, and unhappiness are all things that we know are real because we feel them and experience them. Now, with all of these feelings and emotions swirling around madly in your head, you might think that you'd probably go nuts if there wasn't something in charge or in control of all of this chaos. And you'd be right. That something is called your consciousness. One of the first scientists to write about consciousness was a famous French philosopher named René Descartes, who said way back in 1637, "I think, therefore I am." In other words, consciousness is the part of you that knows who you are, that you're you. And when you look in the mirror, your consciousness sees your reflection and understands that this isn't another person that it's looking at, but this is what you look like to other people. But of all the things that exist in this hidden part of reality, only your consciousness is able to act as a bridge to the physical reality of your five senses. And again, an example will help explain this. Imagine for a moment that you're playing baseball and you're at the plate. The pitcher fires a fastball at you. It is the job of your five senses to see that ball and report it to your consciousness, which will decide whether or not you should swing at the ball. But now suppose that your consciousness sees that the ball is not headed for the strike zone, but it's headed right at your face, and so it tells your body to get out of the way, which it may or may not be able to do in time. So the most important job that your consciousness does is to work with your five senses. They monitor the things that are happening all around you and report that information to your consciousness. Your consciousness evaluates this information so that it can tell your body what to do in order to respond and stay safe. So as I hope you can see, there are an awful lot of things in this hidden, invisible part of reality. Things that we cannot see, feel, touch, taste, or hear, but which we can be pretty certain are real because we experience them every day of our lives. Philosophers, theologians, and scientists have been debating this hidden part of reality for a long time, thousands of years. Some of them think that it's all just an illusion. Others believe that it's real. They've assigned dozens of different names to it: your inner mind, your interior dialogue, your soul, or your subconscious. But for the purposes of these podcasts, we're going to refer to it by the name spiritual reality. Now, we're going to learn more about what goes on in spiritual reality in the next podcast in this series. But for now, let's review the things that we've learned. Reality is divided into two parts. Physical reality is made up of all the things that we can see, feel, touch, taste, and hear. Each thing in this part of reality is physical. That is, it has a size, and it has a weight. It has a location. But spiritual reality contains all of the things that you cannot detect with your senses, although you experience them every day. Now, as human beings, we spend time in both parts of reality. Sometimes we pay attention only to the physical sensations and objects that surround us and focus on the things that we can see and hear. But we also spend a good deal of time thinking about the things that are in spiritual reality, about people that we love and people that we hate. So of these two parts of reality, where do you spend most of your time? For most people, these internal spiritual experiences occupy much more time and attention than the sensations of the physical part. This is why virtual reality helmets can never really fool people into thinking that what they're experiencing is real, because virtual reality can only imitate the physical part of the real world, not the spiritual part. And it's the spiritual part that's a lot larger and more important to us. So be sure you join us for the next podcast in this series. We're going to take a closer look at the differences between physical and spiritual reality, and we'll see if we can't provide a final answer to the question, as human beings, who or what are we? See you then.